Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules to participate in the conversation. And I'm confident with our presenters today, you're going to get some nuggets and insights that are going to serve you well around onboarding and supporting new board members. Here's the format of today. I'm going to kick it off with a poll just to get some insights from you on your thoughts on new board members. Then I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Buckton from ISFIS, who also leads the Rural Advocates of Iowa, for some insights that she can offer. And then Dr. Tony Aylsworth from Pleasantville, Superintendent, will also offer some insights. And I think he put his slide deck in the chat there as well. So both of them, and we'll keep each of those to about 8 or 10 minutes. So they're kind of quick hitters. After that, Amanda will put us in breakout rooms and we'll chat a little bit about insights you can share with each other and nuggets and digest what the presenters shared. And when you're done today, your conversation ends, you'll sign off and we'll follow up with you with the recap. I also want to mention before we move forward with our content that next month we are focused on telling the district story and marketing district programs with the Donovan Group and another superintendent that I haven't secured yet. So that's our focus for October. With that being said, here's our poll for today. I'm going to launch it. If you'll give us some feedback from your perspective, what do you feel like new school board members need most? Or what do you know that new school board members need most when you think about this topic? Go ahead and give us your feedback here. Three saying understanding their role as a school board member. One so far understanding the role as superintendent, perhaps both. We could check more than one. Anyone else want to weigh in on this? Skills to communicate with members of the community, obviously important. Anything else? I thought maybe somebody would put down other, and I was going to ask, what other might be. Interesting. So again, most folks understanding their role as a school board member, obviously understanding the role of the superintendent as well, and that communication piece, certainly important. Thank you for that feedback. Okay, on to Margaret. We're off and running today, so looking forward to that. Margaret, if you'll start with an introduction and jump into your part of the presentation around onboarding and supporting new board members, that will be great.
You bet. Thanks, Trent, and the GLS team for the opportunity to be here today. And I'm starting a timer because I know this is important to stay on track here. So that's the first thing I got to do. All of you, I've probably met you somewhere or another in one of the three hats I wear, either as a partner at Iowa School Finance Information Services or a professional advocate for the Rural School Advocates of Iowa or executive director for the Urban Education Network. Some of you may not know, I was elected to the Des Moines School Board in 2009. That district, for the size of that school district, is like 3 Senate seats. So it's bigger than a Senate election of somebody that might represent your district and many other school districts as a senator. So it's a lot of voters you have to reach out to. There were 12 candidates, 3 incumbents and 1 vacant seat. And I got elected to the 1 vacant seat. And it was a wild ride of a few months of election. And then all of a sudden that hat flips over into governing. And I think that's one of the toughest things for anybody who's been elected to office to understand is the difference between the election process and how you connect with voters. And then all of a sudden you're in that governance role. So what I'm going to do today, let me share my screen here so I make sure I stay on track for my 10 minutes. Do you see the PowerPoint? Good. Okay. I'm just going to talk about some pre-election resources and recruiting, because before we have a board member, it's great to have somebody who has the right kind of experience to get into the role in the first place. An orientation checklist, some board decision-making cycles and timing, and how you can think of your board agendas to get just-in-time information before board members need to decide something. And then some ongoing board development and resources. So before the election, the School Board Association does a really good job of getting information posted on their website and out to media to inform candidates. And they've got a frequently asked questions document that you could just have a link to or have it printed. And anybody who comes in to file papers or just wants to ask questions, you could give them that information up front. They also have a Get on Board Elections toolkit for candidates. And it has things like if your League of Women Voters or your booster club wants to have a candidate forum, some sample questions to ask them. But of course, if the candidates know the questions in advance, it gives them a really big clue as to what's coming in their governance leadership going forward. And then I think of pre-election recruiting perhaps in a way that some people might not have thought about it. As a school leader, I think of opportunities on how you can build local leadership that flows naturally to opting into school board roles. So who do you appoint to that school improvement advisory committee? And I've heard some districts call it a school improvement advisory and advocacy committee, and helping those people become advocates, which is what school board members really are, advocates for their school district. A local finance committee for citizen oversight, or facilities committee, or looking at involving parents or community volunteers that are already engaging in some of that volunteerism and encourage them to take the next step. School board members can also take an active role in encouraging others to run for office. And we often had a running joke on the Des Moines School Board, when I know a lot of folks think about this, is you can't leave until you have somebody who wants to take your place. And I know in smaller districts, that can really be a challenge because it's hard to find folks. So orientation, I thought of the checklist of things that I kind of needed to know when I got on the school board. And the first thing, of course, is the policy manual is the board member's Bible. It is everything that the board member has authority over, and it is the rule book. It has as much authority as the Code of Iowa. It is law. And so start with checking your own board policy for anything that involves new board members. Is there an orientation process? Board ethics, roles and responsibilities. And I highlighted in red because I added this one after I sent the PowerPoint on to Trent and Amanda. But remember, conflict of interest and public purpose too, because those are the things that new board members might step in if they're not paying attention. The policy manual, it's one of the most important things boards do. It's their role. So start with the 100 series or the first chapter. That's the board's work. And it's like eating an elephant. How do you do that one bite at a time? So I would really encourage the orientation to sit down with maybe the board president, the superintendent, the board secretary, and the new board member, and talk about why that policy manual is so important, and especially go through that first chapter. Meeting nuts and bolts. I mean, board meetings are kind of weird when you think about conversations that we have with people on a normal basis. So why is it that we have Robert's rules and open meetings and public records law? How does the public provide input? And typically boards don't engage with the public in that input, they just receive it. How are agendas developed and bills paid lists put together? And what do consent agendas mean? So none of that is a surprise for your new board members. One of the most important things that I got was a list of district contacts when I had questions as a board member. And it helps you explain the chain of command. So who do you call? And most requests are going to go through the superintendent, but maybe they go through the board secretary or the CFO, or you just need to know who the principal is at the school building. But who do you call for certain information? And then I also think it's cool to have an opportunity to have a preview of a meeting. So it could be the superintendent or the board president to say what's going to be on this agenda. And then after the meeting, a little debrief. How did it go? Maybe you can assign a mentor to each board member that's new if you have more than one. So board decision-making cycles and timing. I call this when's the best way to bite the elephant, or the right time. I think that there's a natural cycle in board decision-making, and you think of how do you educate the new board members and remind your experienced folks what their role is and what they have to know. So as you're getting ready to do collective bargaining, that's a good time to review that board policy manual section that deals with staff and contracts and salaries. When you're setting the budget or closing down a fiscal year, review financial goals and the policy that you might have on those the month prior. Just some other things in there you can look at. I think superintendent evaluation processes can also get tricky. You don't want a new board member in particular to not understand that process and then expect when they get to May that you should have done something. So that's kind of an ongoing conversation about what does your policy say about evaluation process, and then how does that play out through the course of the year? And then other things when timely. everybody needs to know about the income surtax. If you're using that with your PEPL, when do you remind people of what that is? And that helps them advocate for the action, especially if voters have to weigh in. Or if you're going to hire new principals, reminding the board what their role is in hiring and not necessarily directing the work of the principal, which is the superintendent's job. Ongoing board development, again, look at your policy manual and see if there are expectations in there. If there aren't any, then your board might want to work on it this year before you get to the next November election, because when you have it in there that says we're all going to engage in some kind of learning, that really helps everybody know that's their job to be polished and the things they need to know in order to make decisions. I encourage experienced board members to mentor or attend with the newbies when there is a training. And it both sets the expectation for the new person to go, but makes them feel welcome. If the board president says, hey, let's go to this together, it also keeps your experienced board members up to date too. And then every situation is different. Sometimes board members can't get to some of the trainings because of their job experience or what's happening at home. In other places, they may not want to for whatever reason. So figure out the best format. You might want a facilitated workshop at the board table. You might encourage attending conferences, training sessions, either statewide or regional. And there are virtual opportunities also. And when you think of those, should the whole board do that together or just individually driven? And you may have different answers to those based on the situation your current district is facing. For resources, I've got IASB's link here for their Learning Hub. They have a whole menu of things to do. At their November convention, there's content for new board members, a series and orientation sessions, but that happens 2 weeks after the election. So as soon as people have filed papers, it's a good idea to reach out to the candidates and say, hey, in the possibility that you're elected, why don't you save these 2 days on your calendar and be prepared to go? And if you're elected and you want to go, then the district covers the cost for you. So it's a nice way to let them know they're part of the team early. And then for ISFIS, we put together a series of building block videos, and they have a short, 10 to 20 minutes of it's kind of a module in video with some handouts and some discussion questions. And all of these came from particular school districts that were asking for content. So if there's something at your board table you need to educate new board members about or experienced board members, just let us know and we'll do our best to put together a module for you. And then remembering you don't know what you don't know. Invite those new candidates to attend a few meetings, encourage the board members to watch recordings of past board meetings, share the minutes of the last year, give a virtual tour of your website so they know where to look. And then my favorite thoughts as a school board member that I always remind board members of when they're becoming in this role, a governance structure and a leader, just ask yourself that question. Does our board policy say something about this issue? And then secondly, have you talked to your teacher, principal, or superintendent about the issue? And if new board members could just remember those two things, it would smooth out a lot of the challenges that you have. And there's my 10 minutes. And of course, I have a recipe because, it's an ISFIS product here. So a chickpea tuna salad, you can read that at your leisure. So that's all I've got for you today.
I was just going to say that's called a fringe benefit or a recipe right there. And if you're at a conference, you get a cooking utensil from ISFIS as well, right?
You sure do. I think the latest one is either a potato peeler to skim the fat off the budget or a spatula so you can turn over a new program.
Love the practicality of that and the resources that you guys have through ISFIS as well. Fantastic examples and models. And I hope, Amanda, in our recap, we got to get down there. Margaret's 2 points there about do we have policy on this and have we followed the chain of command or who should be taking care of that? Just great nuggets and insights for new board members. Like you said, if we can get them to know two things, that would be two very important things. Thank you, Margaret, and we'll follow up with those resources as well. Tony, over to you from the superintendent perspective that's been through onboarding lots of superintendents. And I chose Tony out of all the superintendents because I know he's done a great job onboarding board members and actually teaches some of this stuff to aspiring superintendents at Drake. And so I knew he was the one to offer some insight on this topic as well. So Tony, you got some time now.
Great. Thanks, Trent. And thanks, Margaret. I feel a lot better having listened to your presentation. There's a lot of parallels here. Those of you that have taken the time to text me and remind me of what a tough act Margaret is to follow, message understood. I feel better about it knowing that we've got some of the same content here. But yeah, just try to offer a little bit of superintendent perspective. Trent mentioned it, but I'm the superintendent at Pleasantville. This is year number 9 for me. And so had the chance and opportunity to onboard and support a lot of board members over the years. I've been, one distinction that I think makes our district unique is that I feel like every year we've had an election, our board has gotten a little bit stronger. And I think it's because of some of the points Margaret alluded to in terms of the board making sure that there's somebody of high quality there to take their place. But let's dive in here. I linked the slides that I plan to reference here in the chat, so you've all got them. And I'm just going to take it away here. The theme of my first 3 or 4 slides is really going to be simple, and that is just be proactive. I align with everything Margaret said and offered in terms of the great supports and the great conversations. One thing I've picked up on over the years, though, and have started to implement in the last handful of elections is I used to meet those candidates when they would take out the paperwork to run and then start having conversations after the election. And I've learned that being proactive and having a lot of those conversations up front has served our district really well. So on the second slide, I just referenced, I think it's an important thing for a superintendent to think about in their mind, who and what would make a good board member, and start to strategize a little bit. And I'll jump ahead to the second slide. And I was really careful about putting this slide in here. In fact, I called Trent last night just to make sure that I wasn't overstepping my bounds here, because I put the word recruitment of board members in quotations there, because you need to be really cautious about this. But I think from some practical advice is to take a balanced approach. You can't be out there championing someone's campaign or very actively trying to recruit candidates for the board. I don't think that's okay. But I do think it's important for you to think about who would be good candidates in your community or in your district, and then to think about who are some of your community influencers or who are some of your sitting board members that might encourage those good people that really align with the vision and the direction the district is headed. Because in today's world of politics and conflict, I don't think superintendents that are in it for the long haul can leave board elections to chance. And so there's a real balance and a fine line there between being uninvolved, but being overly involved. And I hope that that slide gives you some practical advice on maybe how to consider that. On slide 4, Margaret touched on this. I totally align with this. The only thing I would add is to do it before the election, and that is to help the board understand their authority. That was the number 1 hit on the survey we did before the session started. But I found that helping board members understand their authority before the election is powerful, particularly if you've got somebody running that has an axe to grind. I think that if you look down that bulleted list of things you see, some things you don't see are the board doesn't have the authority to be the superintendent. They don't have the authority to be in charge of recommendations for hiring or firing staff. That's all the superintendent's role of responsibility. And I think generally when you have somebody with an axe to grind, that's the issue behind the issue is they either want to be the superintendent or they want to hire or fire somebody. And if you can help them understand that they don't have that authority and that the board operates as a whole, I have found that that's a really good way to sort of demotivate board members that are thinking about their candidacy for the wrong reasons. Jumping ahead to slide 5, this is probably the most important thing for those great candidates, the people that you want helping your district and serving in this type of roles, is just to, from the very first sit down you have with candidates after they take out the paperwork, is just start talking about the district mission and vision and where you're headed and how you got there, and just living that question there that it's posed. How does this decision, how does this discussion, how does this action get us closer to our desired state or our vision? And so I think if you can get board members in the habit of that early on and even up front before the election, it starts to become a question that permeates through their board service. And they get to thinking about how does this get us closer to our vision, as opposed to, does this appease my constituents? Margaret's advice was spot on. Help them understand board meetings. I've had 2 great board members elected who had never been to or seen or observed a school board meeting before. And so I think there's always this assumption that people know how these meetings work and they know Robert's Rules of Order. And I think almost taking your new board candidates and assuming they know nothing is a good way to start, a good place to start. Help them understand the law. particularly the complexity of Chapter 21, and also helping them understand that ignorance of the law isn't an excuse. If they break certain laws, they can be held responsible personally, as well as the district professionally. On slide 7, I just touch on a little bit of wisdom here, 3 onboarding topics, I think, to hit again and reemphasize. So after the election, really slides 2 through 6 are sort of pre-election advice. But once they're elected, I still think it's very important for them to have a crystal clear understanding of the chain of command and kind of that conversation of when they come to the superintendent with a concern or an issue, making sure that they've already talked to that coach or that teacher or that principal before that person comes to a board member with a complaint. Reiterating the authority and the role of the board. And I have found personally IASB used to do, and I hope they continue to do this now that Harry's no longer with them, but it was a very simple activity. You had 2 sort of signs that they held up. They would list off scenarios to the board, and the folks in the audience would either raise a sign that said my role or not my role. And I have had several board members over the years tell me that was very helpful for them in terms of onboarding. And again, Margaret touched on this, but school finance and policy are really important. However, I would offer a little bit of advice that I think early on in my superintendency, I had a tendency to club board members over the head with this stuff and have them spend hours and hours and hours on it. It's very complicated. I would just encourage kind of a gradual transition into it. Don't just give them the policy manual and expect that they're going to read it in their free time. And I do think there's a certain amount of understanding they have to have. The big one with finance seems to be that whole conversation about the buckets of funding and what the permissible uses of the funds are. That conversation about why are we adding on to the school, but we can't give a better raise to our staff. Conversations like that they need to be able to have. But I also don't think you need to get way down into the weeds the first 2 weeks after the election and start overwhelming them with policy stuff or with finance basics. Slide 8 is just an example of a visual I put together. Our board seems to really like this, and it helps me explain finance to people. It's just a breakdown of the different funds, the permissible uses, where they come from, and then it's a breakdown of Pleasantville's local rate. So if you want the template and want to start building your own out, I'm happy to share it and send it with you. It's very simple to manipulate and update for your district. and board policy, I see that as an important, the reason for the fire extinguisher visual is I believe that policy is sort of that structure that moves the district towards the vision. But it's also that thing that if you happen to have a board member with an axe to grind get elected, policy is the main thing that's going to help keep them in check. And so help them understand that authority, understand the policy, the difference between board regulations and procedural type things. But those are all important things that sort of help put out those fires and bring stability to the board if you have a rogue board member elected. On slide 10 here, as I start to wrap up, just a little bit of wisdom there on the superintendent's role working with the board. Just over communicate things. Don't ever let your board get blindsided. I think that's the number one thing that turns off new board members in terms of their support for the district or the superintendent is if all of a sudden they routinely get hit up out in the community or at church or whatever their circle is. The target is always to try to make sure that doesn't happen. But if it happens often, you're probably not doing enough to keep them up to date and up to speed about district issues. I won't go into a lot of detail on slide 11 here, but there's a really good set of standards for effective school boards. IASB's work and research on this, fantastic. Again, another tool kind of for superintendents to lean on early to help them understand their roles and responsibilities. It's probably just as important to understand what their role isn't as opposed to what their role is, in my experience. And then just a bulleted list on the last slide there that I'll reference here, just training and support, leverage ISFIS, IASB, all those different really good resources. There's an annual conference here at the state level that's solid. There's also one at the national level that's very good. And then slides 14 through 20, whatever, are just some interesting facts and figures, ideas, wisdom that I put together here. If you're having a hard time sleeping some night and want to glance through them, they'll probably put you right to sleep. But just some interesting things about school boards in our state and some tips I've pulled together over the years. That's an important one, Trent, if you back up one slide. that bottom piece there, when it comes to election advice, they'll take out the paperwork, they'll get it from your business office more often than not. One interesting kind of war story here. Candidates have to get a number of signatures on a petition to take out the paperwork to run for the board. Several years ago in my district, a patron of our community asked our business office how many signatures did they need to have. The business office wasn't sure, but speculated, and they were wrong. And unfortunately, they gave the wrong number of signatures. The person trying to run for the board ended up not getting enough signatures to be considered, and really was an ugly sort of moment where that person who didn't have enough signatures accused the business office of intentionally giving him the wrong number because we didn't want to see him on the board. So when it comes to the petition process and all that, talk to your county auditor. Like, make sure you either know that number or have them talk to the county auditor to get that answer. Don't speculate. Yeah, so that's all the wisdom I could come up with. And my contact information is on the last slide. So if you ever have any questions about anything, I want to make sure you know how to get a hold of me. But yeah, happy to try to offer a little bit of insight and be a part of this.
Yeah, I love the practical examples and resources that will make sure everybody has there, Tony, and understanding their role, but also what their role isn't. A clear takeaway from what you shared there. But also mention that one of our topics down the road on these Friday focus webinars is actually superintendent evaluation and compensation. I get a lot of phone calls on compensation and what's the market doing, and what are the comparisons and things like that. So that came up in both presentations, and something we'll add to the agenda in the spring. So Tony, thank you. Appreciate that, and appreciate you sharing your contact information and putting together so many good resources.